The scent of entitlement is unmistakable. It smells like overpriced perfume trying to mask a deep-seated insecurity. On Aura Wing Flight 732 to Aspen, that scent was emanating from Seat 2A. In Seat 2B sat Dr. Serafina James, a woman of quiet power, holding a simple worn canvas bag on her lap. To the couple beside her, this bag was a mark of shame, an object of ridicule in the exclusive bubble of first class. They saw a cheap bag and made an assumption. They couldn't have known they weren't just mocking a fellow passenger. They were mocking the very woman who signed the checks, who owned the plane, and who was about to teach them a life-altering lesson in humility and respect. Their judgment was passed in whispers and sneers. Her response would be delivered with crushing corporate silence. The chaos of New York's JFK Airport was a finely tuned orchestra of human anxiety. Business travelers with grim expressions power-walked through the terminal's tourists herded their children like bewildered sheep, and the air hummed with a dozen languages, all saying some version of "hurry up" or "wait." Through this river of humanity moved Dr. Serafina James, an island of calm. Dressed in a simple but elegant charcoal grey cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable leather flats, she was utterly unremarkable, and that was precisely by design. No logos, no flashy jewelry, just the quiet confidence of a woman who had nothing to prove. In her hand, she carried a small carbon fiber laptop case. On her shoulder hung a faded olive-green canvas tote bag. Its leather handles were worn smooth with use, and a small frayed patch near the bottom corner told a story of long, faithful service. It had been a gift from her grandmother, a woman who taught her that the value of an object was in its utility and its history, not its price tag. Serafina was flying to Aspen for a final on-the-ground inspection. Her investment firm, Nexus Capital, had recently acquired the struggling boutique airline Aura Wing for a steal. The previous management had focused too much on a gaudy, superficial image of luxury while letting operational efficiency and customer service rot from the inside. Serafina's specialty was seeing the powerful humming engine beneath a coat of bad paint. She believed Aura Wing could be salvaged, transformed, and her method was always the same: see it from the customer's perspective. No private jets, no special treatment. She booked a first-class seat on a commercial flight under a pseudonym, Sarah Jones, to experience her new acquisition firsthand. As the pre-boarding call for first class echoed, Serafina joined the short queue. In front of her stood a couple who seemed to have stepped directly out of a catalogue for How to Display New Money. The man, who she'd later learn was Chad Davenport, was tall with overly gelled hair and a tight-fitting blazer that looked one size too small, as if to emphasize the gym-sculpted physique beneath it. He loudly discussed leveraging assets and Q4 synergy into his AirPods. His partner Tiffany was a cascade of brand names. A Louis Vuitton scarf was artfully draped around her neck, a Gucci handbag was clutched in her manicured fingers, and a Cartier love bracelet jangled on her wrist every time she flicked her platinum blonde hair. They radiated an aura of performative wealth, demanding the attention and admiration of everyone around them. When Tiffany turned, her eyes fell on Serafina's canvas tote. A small, almost imperceptible sneer curled the corner of her lip. She nudged Chad, who followed her gaze. He let out a short, derisive huff of air. "Can you believe it?" Tiffany whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Some people get a taste of the good life and still bring their farmer's market bags with them." Chad chuckled. "Probably a complimentary gift from whatever budget hotel she's staying at. Some people just don't have the class for this cabin babe." Serafina heard every word. A younger version of herself might have felt a sting of anger or embarrassment. But years of navigating boardrooms filled with men who underestimated her had forged her emotions into steel. She simply offered a neutral, unreadable expression and focused on the boarding agent. This wasn't a personal insult, it was data. This is the type of customer the old Aura Wing attracted, she thought. Arrogant, judgmental, and valuing image over substance. It was a symptom of the disease she was here to cure. On board the plane's interior was exactly as the reports had described, dated, and trying too hard. The wood trim was peeling plastic, and the leather seats, while spacious, were cracked in places. Serafina made a mental note. Her seat was 2B, a window seat. The Davenports had 2A and the aisle seat across 2C. As she went to place her canvas bag in the overhead compartment, Chad, who was already seated, stopped her. "Whoa, hold on," he said, holding up a hand. "I've got my roller up there. It's vintage Goyard. I'd rather not have that thing," he said, gesturing to her tote, rubbing up against it and getting it all dusty. Tiffany giggled a sound like tiny, sharp bells. "He's just being protective of our things, honey. You understand." Serafina looked from his perfectly polished, ostentatious suitcase to her own humble bag. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him, her gaze level and unnervingly steady. "I'm sure it will be fine," she said, her voice calm and even. She placed her bag gently in the space next to his. The simple act of defiance, of not backing down, seemed to infuriate them more than any argument could have. Chad scoffed and turned away pointedly, putting his noise-cancelling headphones on. Tiffany gave Serafina a final withering look before burying her nose in a fashion magazine. The flight attendant, a young man named Liam, with kind eyes and a weary smile, came by to offer pre-departure beverages. He treated Serafina with the same professional courtesy as he did the Davenports. "Ma'am, can I get you something to drink before we take off champagne orange juice?" "Just some water, please." "Still not sparkling," Serafina said with a warm smile. When Liam turned to Tiffany, her tone shifted instantly. "I'll have a Bellini, and make sure the Prosecco is fresh. The last time I flew this airline, it was practically flat." Liam's smile tightened slightly. "Of course, miss." As the cabin doors closed and the plane began its slow taxi to the runway, Serafina settled into her seat. She wasn't just a passenger on Flight 732. She was a scientist, and her new company was under the microscope. The Davenports were her first and most fascinating subjects. She pulled a worn paperback from her canvas bag, its spine cracked from countless readings, and began to ignore them. To them, her silence was an admission of her inferior status. To her, it was the quiet before a storm they couldn't possibly see coming. The ascent was smooth, and soon the plane was a silver dart cruising high above the patchwork of the American Midwest. Below the world was a silent map of towns and fields. Inside the first-class cabin of Aura Wing Flight 732, however, the atmosphere was anything but silent. The Davenports had made it their personal mission to treat the cabin as their private lounge. Chad had taken off his blazer to reveal a crisp, monogrammed shirt, and was now loudly taking a business call, peppering his speech with obnoxious jargon. "We need to circle back on the deliverables. Peterson. It's all about optics. Maximize the ROI." Tiffany, meanwhile, had become a critic of all she surveyed. The Bellini was acceptable, but not great. The mixed nuts were a bit pedestrian. The in-flight entertainment system was practically prehistoric. Each complaint was delivered just loudly enough for Serafina to hear, punctuated by a pointed glance in her direction, as if to say, "See, this is what people with standards expect." "You wouldn't know." Serafina continued to read her book, turning the pages with placid regularity. Her calm was a mirror, and the Davenports' ugly behavior was reflected right back at them, amplified. Her refusal to be baited was to them an act of supreme arrogance from someone they had already deemed unworthy. Liam, the flight attendant, was doing his best to manage the situation. He was a seasoned professional, but his patience was clearly being tested. He refilled Tiffany's drink with a practiced smile, endured Chad's boorish demands for more snacks, and repeatedly gently reminded him that voice calls were discouraged during flight. About an hour in, Tiffany decided to escalate. She leaned across the small space, separating her from Serafina. "I just have to ask," she began, her voice dripping with fake curiosity. "What do you do? It must be so exciting to get a chance to fly up front like this. Is it a special occasion? A lottery win, perhaps?" Serafina slowly lowered her book, placing a finger to mark her page. She looked at Tiffany, her expression one of mild curiosity, as if studying a particularly interesting insect. "I'm in the logistics business," she answered simply. "Software mostly." Chad, having finished his call, chimed in. "Logistics fascinating. I'm in private equity. We acquire logistics companies, actually. Maybe you've heard of my firm, Sterling Thorn Capital." He puffed out his chest. Serafina's expression didn't flicker, but inside, a switch was flipped. Sterling Thorn. She knew the name. A notoriously aggressive, second-rate firm known for hostile takeovers and stripping companies for parts. They had made a failed low-ball bid for a small tech startup she had mentored 5 years ago. They were vultures, not builders. "I can't say that I have," Serafina replied, her tone still perfectly level. The dismissal, however polite, hit Chad's ego like a physical blow. He exchanged a look with Tiffany. They couldn't comprehend someone not being impressed by them. Their conclusion was simple: she must be lying or ignorant. "Well," Chad said, leaning back with a smug grin, "we're heading to Aspen for the Winter Synergy Summit. It's a very exclusive gathering of, well, people who are shaping the future of finance and tech. You have to be invited. The networking alone is worth millions." He said it as if he were bestowing a great gift of knowledge upon a clueless peasant. "That sounds productive," Serafina said, her voice betraying no hint of sarcasm, though the thought was certainly there. She reopened her book, the universal signal for, "This conversation is over." This final act of disinterest was too much for Tiffany to bear. Her insecurity, wrapped in layers of luxury goods, finally snapped. She turned to Liam, who was passing by in the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm feeling a bit cramped." "This woman's bag," she gestured disdainfully toward the floor where Serafina had placed her canvas tote after retrieving her book, "is overflowing into my foot space. It's unhygienic. I'd like it moved." Liam looked down. The bag was tucked neatly under the seat in front of Serafina, not encroaching on anyone's space. "Miss, I assure you it's not in the way," Liam said politely. "There's plenty of room." "I don't care," Tiffany snapped. "I don't want to look at it. It's cluttering up the cabin. We paid a premium for this experience, not to be surrounded by someone's cast-offs. Find somewhere else to put it. Maybe back in coach, where it belongs." The cruelty of the last statement hung in the air. Other first-class passengers who had been trying to mind their own business now shifted uncomfortably. They looked at Serafina expecting a reaction. Tears, anger, a shouted retort. They got none. Serafina calmly closed her book again. She looked at Liam, whose face was a mixture of apology and helplessness. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of, "It's okay, I'll handle this." Then she turned her full attention to Tiffany. For the first time, the placid observational mask dropped, and the Davenports got a glimpse of the formidable intelligence and power that lay beneath. Her eyes, which had been soft and unassuming, now held a glint of polished steel. "The bag stays," she said. Her voice was still quiet, yet it cut through the cabin's hum with absolute authority. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Chad, seeing Tiffany momentarily stunned into silence, felt the need to reassert their dominance. "Who do you think you are?" "You don't make the rules here. We're preferred platinum-tier flyers. A complaint from us carries weight." "I am a passenger in seat 2B, Serafina replied, her gaze unwavering. "And my bag is where it's supposed to be. This is the end of the discussion." She picked up her book for a third time. But this time, no one in the cabin believed she was actually reading. The air was thick with tension. The Davenports sat fuming, their faces red with impotent rage. They had tried to bully and belittle a woman they assumed was beneath them, and she had refused to break. They had miscalculated, and for people whose entire world was built on a precise calculation of status and power, it was an unforgivable error. They didn't know the nature of their mistake, not yet. But they knew, with a dawning sense of dread, that they had started something they might not be able to finish. The remainder of the flight passed in a state of cold war. The Davenports communicated in exaggerated whispers, casting venomous looks toward Serafina every few minutes. They had been publicly shut down, and their egos were bleeding. For them, this was no longer about a bag. It was about power. They had to win. Serafina, for her part, appeared to be the picture of tranquility. She had, in fact, finished a chapter of her book, made a few notes in a small, leather-bound journal she retrieved from her tote, and even accepted a cup of green tea from a grateful-looking Liam. But beneath the surface, a decision was solidifying. Her trip had started as a passive observation mission. The behavior of the Davenports, however, was a critical data point she could no longer just observe. It was a symptom of a cultural rot in her new company that needed to be excised decisively and publicly. Their arrogance wasn't just unpleasant, it was a liability, the kind of premium customer who bullies others and harasses staff was not the clientele she wanted for the new Aura Wing. The tipping point when it came was not a shout, but a splash. As the plane began its initial descent into the mountainous terrain around Aspen, Liam came through the cabin to collect any remaining glasses and trash. He moved with a practiced efficiency, his steps steady despite the gentle turbulence. "Mr. and Mrs. Davenport, Ms. Jones," he said, his voice a low murmur. "We'll be landing in about 20 minutes. Can I take anything for you?" Serafina handed him her teacup with a nod of thanks. Chad passed over his empty tumbler, but Tiffany held onto her half-full glass of Pellegrino sparkling water. "I'll keep this," she said dismissively. "My throat gets dry during landing." Liam hesitated. "Airline policy requires all glassware to be collected before the final descent, miss. I can get you water in a plastic cup if you'd like." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't be so dramatic. It's just water." As she spoke, she gestured flippantly with the hand holding the glass. Whether it was a genuine accident born of her theatrical indignation or a passive-aggressive act of malice, Serafina would never know for sure. But the result was the same. The glass tilted, and a cascade of icy sparkling water drenched the side of Serafina's canvas tote bag, which was resting by her feet. A collective gasp went through the nearby passengers. Tiffany's eyes widened in mock horror. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," she said, her voice utterly devoid of genuine remorse. "It's just so clumsy of me. I guess it's wet now. Good thing it's just canvas." The insult was clear. "It's a cheap bag, so who cares if it's ruined?" Chad snickered softly beside her, a low, ugly sound of victory. Liam rushed forward with a handful of napkins. "Ma'am, I am so sorry about that." "Let me help you." Serafina held up a hand, stopping him. She looked down at her bag. The dark, wet patch was spreading across the olive-green fabric. The water would not permanently damage it, but that wasn't the point. This was a deliberate final act of disrespect. It was a violation. That bag held her grandmother's memory, her personal journals, her sense of self, all things more valuable than every branded item the Davenports owned. They had crossed a line. Slowly, deliberately, Serafina bent down and picked up her bag, placing it on her lap. She blotted at the wet spot with a single napkin, her movements calm and measured. She didn't look at Tiffany. She didn't acknowledge her fake apology. Instead, she reached into the bag, pulled out her sleek, unmarked satellite phone, a piece of technology far more advanced and expensive than anything the Davenports owned, and flipped it open. Chad watched her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Who are you calling?" "The fashion police. Going to report a water-on-canvas crime." Serafina ignored him. She pressed a single speed dial button. The phone connected almost instantly. "Isabel, it's me," she said, her voice low and clear, devoid of any anger, just pure, cold efficiency. "I need you to patch me through to Marcus Thorne. Yes, right now. It's important." A brief pause. The Davenports exchanged a confused glance. The name Marcus Thorne meant nothing to them. To anyone in the upper echelons of the aviation industry, however, it was a name that commanded instant respect. Marcus Thorne was the brilliant, notoriously ruthless operations chief she had personally headhunted from a major international carrier and installed as the new CEO of Aura Wing Airlines just 3 weeks ago. "Marcus," she said a moment later. "Serafina, the flight has been illuminating. I need you to do something for me. I'm on flight 732, landing at Aspen in approximately 15 minutes. I need you to meet the plane at the gate and bring airport security with you." "No, I'm perfectly fine. This isn't about me. It's about brand standards." She listened for a moment, then continued. "We have 2 passengers in first class, seats 2A and 2C. Names are Chad and Tiffany Davenport. They have demonstrated behavior that is fundamentally incompatible with the Aura Wing brand we are building. I am revoking their travel privileges. For life. Effective the moment the wheels touch the ground." In seat 2A, Chad's smug expression began to melt, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. And Tiffany's smile faltered. This was not the reaction they had expected. "Yes, for life," Serafina confirmed into the phone. "And Marcus have their luggage pulled from the carousel. They can make their own arrangements to have it shipped. They are not to receive any further assistance from any Aura Wing employee. Is that clear?" She listened again. Then a hint of ice entered her tone. "One more thing. The man Chad Davenport mentioned he works for a firm called Sterling Thorne Capital. Get me everything you can on them. Specifically, I want to know who their largest clients and investors are. Have that report on my desk by the time I get to the hotel. Thank you, Marcus." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her damp canvas bag. The cabin was silent. The Davenports stared at her, their faces pale. The performance, the arrogance, it had all vanished, replaced by the dawning, terrifying realization that they had made a catastrophic mistake. They didn't understand what was happening, but they understood the language of power. And the quiet woman in the grey sweater had just spoken it more fluently than they ever had in their lives. Tiffany finally found her voice, a weak, trembling version of its former self. What was that? Who are you?" Serafina turned to face her fully. The mask of the unassuming passenger was gone forever. In its place was the face of Dr. Serafina, James billionaire investor, corporate titan, and the new owner of Aura Wing Airlines. She said, her voice as quiet and as devastating as a seismic shock. "I'm the person who just fired you as a customer." The final 20 minutes of the flight felt like an eternity. The Davenports sat frozen in their seats, the blood drained from their faces. The cabin Once their personal stage had become a pressure cooker of their own making. They occasionally shot panicked, questioning looks at Serafina, but she had once again retreated into a state of unnerving calm, staring out the window as the magnificent, snow-dusted peaks of the Rocky Mountains drew closer. She was no longer observing them. She had passed her judgment and was now simply waiting for it to be executed. The plane touched down at Aspen, Pitkin County Airport, with a gentle bump, the roar of the engines reversing a deafening announcement of their arrival. For the Davenports, it was the sound of a guillotine dropping. As the aircraft taxied toward the small exclusive terminal, the usual post-landing bustle was absent in the first-class cabin. No one unbuckled their seatbelts. No one reached for their bags. The other passengers, sensing the gravity of the situation, remained seated, their eyes darting between the stone-faced Serafina and the ghostly white Davenports. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Liam's voice, now tinged with an understandable nervousness, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Aspen. We ask that you please remain in your seats for a moment. The captain has informed me we need to wait for ground staff to approach the aircraft before deplaning." This was highly unusual. A collective murmur went through the plane. Through her window, Serafina could see it all unfolding. A black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up on the tarmac near the jet bridge. 2 uniformed airport security officers stood grimly beside it. And stepping out of the vehicle was a tall, impeccably dressed man in a tailored Brioni suit. He had silver hair, a sharp, intelligent face, and an aura of absolute no-nonsense authority. This was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Aura Wing Airlines. When the jet bridge connected and the cabin door hissed open, it was not the ground agent who appeared first. It was Marcus. He stepped into the aircraft, his eyes immediately scanning the cabin until they landed on Serafina. He gave a slight, respectful nod. "Dr. James," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "Welcome to Aspen. Everything is in place as you requested." The title Dr. James hung in the air. Chad and Tiffany flinched as if struck. Marcus then turned his gaze to the Davenports, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop by 20 degrees. His expression was one of cool, professional disdain. "Mr. and Mrs. Davenport," he asked, though it was clearly not a question. "I am Marcus Thorne, CEO of Aura Wing Airlines. If you would please collect your personal belongings and accompany me." Chad finally jolted out of his stupor, tried to salvage the situation, falling back on the only tool he knew, blustering entitlement. "CIO, what is this nonsense?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "We've been harassed by this woman the entire flight. She's clearly unstable. We're going to file a formal complaint. We demand to speak to someone in charge." Marcus Thorne allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. "You are speaking to someone in charge," he said smoothly. "And as for your complaint, we have the flight attendant's report statements from 3 other first-class passengers and the full audio and video from the cabin's security recorders. I don't think you want to pursue that course of action." Tiffany, near tears, finally found her voice. "But who is she?" she pleaded, pointing a trembling finger at Serafina. "Why are you listening to her? She's nobody." This was the moment of truth, the grand reveal. Marcus Thorne looked from Tiffany's desperate, confused face to the calm, composed figure of Dr. Serafina James, who was now slowly gathering her things, placing her book and journal back into her damp canvas tote. He turned back to Tiffany, his voice clear and precise, each word a hammer blow to their crumbling world. "That's where you are mistaken," he said. "That woman is Dr. Serafina James. She is the principal shareholder of Nexus Capital, the firm that completed its acquisition of this airline last month." He paused, letting the information sink in, watching the dawning horror spread across their faces like a stain. "Dr. James doesn't just fly on Aura Wing," he declared, his voice resonating through the silent cabin. "Dr. James owns Aura Wing." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of two lives built on a fragile foundation of arrogance and perceived status imploding. The cheap bag, the quiet woman, the logistics software, it all snapped into a new terrifying focus. They hadn't been punching down. They had been kicking a hornet's nest the size of a mountain. "Now," Marcus continued, his tone shifting from explanatory to dismissive. "As per Dr. James's directive, your status as passengers has been terminated. The security officers will escort you from the airport premises. Your checked luggage is being offloaded as we speak and will be placed on the curb outside the terminal. From this point forward, you are both permanently banned from traveling on Aura Wing Airlines and any of its partner carriers. For life." He gestured curtly toward the exit. "Please, get off my plane." Humiliation washed over Chad and Tiffany in a sickening wave. Every eye in the cabin was on them. The whispers started ripples of shock and dawning comprehension. Defeated, and with no fight left in them, they fumbled for their things. Chad couldn't even look at his precious Goyard suitcase as he pulled it from the overhead bin. Tiffany clutched her Gucci bag like a shield, her face a mask of tear-streaked makeup and disbelief. As they were led past Serafina's seat, their eyes met hers one last time. They seemed to be searching for something, a hint of triumph, of gloating, of satisfaction, but they found none. Serafina's expression was not one of anger or victory. It was one of profound, dispassionate disappointment. It was the look of a leader who had just been forced to clean up a mess. They were escorted off the plane, a walk of shame down the jet bridge and into the waiting custody of the security officers. Their Aspen dream, the Winter Synergy Summit, had ended before it even began, not with networking and champagne, but with a public and brutal expulsion. Only after they were gone did Serafina finally rise. She slung the canvas tote over her shoulder. She nodded to Liam, the flight attendant. "Thank you for your professionalism, Liam. It was noted." Liam, looking stunned, but relieved, simply nodded back. "Of course, Ma'am." She then walked to the front of the plane where Marcus was waiting. "Is the car ready?" She asked, her voice all business now. "Ready and waiting on the tarmac, Doctor," he replied, "and the report you requested on Sterling Thorn Capital is already being uploaded to your secure server. Preliminary findings are interesting." "Good," Serafina said. "Let's not keep it waiting." As she stepped out of the aircraft and into the crisp, cold Aspen air, she didn't give the Davenports another thought. For her, they were a problem that had been solved. But for Chad and Tiffany, standing on a curb as their expensive luggage was unceremoniously dumped beside them, the karma had only just begun. The Aspen-Pitkin County Airport is small, a boutique entry point for the world's 1%. It is designed for seamless, discreet transitions from private jet to luxury SUV. Being publicly escorted out and left on the curb like a common trespasser is an anomaly, a social death sentence in a town built on image. As Chad and Tiffany Davenport stood there shivering in the mountain air that was suddenly far colder than they had anticipated, their first instinct was damage control. Tiffany, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer with a modest but curated following, immediately pulled out her phone. Her plan was to spin the narrative to post a story about the horrific, unprofessional service on Aura Wing and a deranged fellow passenger. But as her screen lit up, a flood of notifications appeared. Her social media was already on fire. A passenger from the flight, a tech blogger from San Francisco, who had been sitting a few rows back, had filmed the entire confrontation at the gate on his phone. He had already posted a 60-second clip to his Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok with the caption, "Wild Scenes on Aura Wing Flight to Aspen," entitled "Couple Bullies. A quiet woman in first class, all flight. Turns out she owns the airline. You can't make this stuff up. Karma. Unicorn Aura Wing. Let Aspen. The video was a masterclass in humiliation. It showed Marcus Thorne's cool arrival, Tiffany's panicked pointing finger, and the devastating crystal-clear line, Dr. James owns Aura Wing. It then showed their walk of shame off the plane. It was going viral, fast. "Chad, look at this!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. Chad grabbed the phone. He watched the video, his face growing paler with each passing second. The comments were a tidal wave of ridicule and condemnation. CEO had the coldest line of the century. "Imagine being that arrogant and that wrong. This is the karma I live for." Louis Vuitton scarf, but a bankrupt character. Someone find out who these people are. And people were. Within minutes, online sleuths had identified them from their social media tags on previous travel posts. Their Instagram handles were being shared, their LinkedIn profiles screenshotted. The pristine, carefully constructed digital facade of their perfect life was being sledgehammered into oblivion. "We have to call a lawyer," Chad sputtered, running a hand through his now disheveled hair. "This is slander defamation." But as he reached for his own phone to call his firm's legal department, an email notification popped up on his screen. The subject line was stark, urgent regarding your conduct. It was from Robert Harrison, the senior managing partner of Sterling Thorne Capital, the man who was not only Chad's boss, but also the firm's notoriously unforgiving patriarch. The email was brief and brutal. "Chad, a video has been brought to my attention. In it, you appear to be engaged in grossly unprofessional and embarrassing behavior on a commercial flight. This alone would warrant a severe reprimand. However, I have also just received a call from Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Aura Wing Airlines. He informed me that the target of your antics was Dr. Serafina James. Perhaps in your aspirational climb, you failed to do your homework. Dr. James, through Nexus Capital, is one of the single largest private investors in the holding company that owns our most important client, a multi-billion-dollar tech portfolio we have spent 3 years cultivating. Dr. James is not just an airline owner. She is a titan in the tech and finance world, the world you claim to be a part of. Your actions have not just embarrassed the firm. You have jeopardized a 9-figure relationship. You have proven yourself to be a reckless, short-sighted liability. Consider your employment with Sterling Thorne Capital terminated effective immediately. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. Security will pack up the personal effects from your office. Do not attempt to contact anyone at this firm again. Robert Harrison. Chad read the email once, then twice. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the pavement. "It's over," he whispered, his voice hollow. "I'm fired." Tiffany stared at him, her own social media nightmare forgotten for a moment. "What, he can't do that? It was a private trip." "You don't understand," Chad said, his voice rising with hysteria. "The woman, Dr. James, she's connected to Harrison's biggest client. I didn't just insult a passenger, Tiffany. I insulted our money. I insulted his money." The full scope of their disaster was now crashing down on them. They were stranded in Aspen with no return flight. Their names were being dragged through the mud all over the internet. And Chad, the source of their lavish lifestyle, had just been fired in the most humiliating way possible. Their exclusive Winter Synergy Summit hotel booking was, of course, tied to Chad's corporate account. A quick frantic call confirmed that the reservation had been cancelled by his now former employer. The dream trip to network with the powerful had transformed into a nightmare of being cast out by them. As they stood there, surrounded by their suddenly burdensome luggage, a sleek black Escalade purred past them and onto the private tarmac. Through the tinted window they could just make out the silhouette of Dr. Serafina James, sitting calmly in the back, her phone to her ear, already moving on to her next item of business. She didn't even glance in their direction. To her, they were no longer a data point, a problem, or even a memory. They were simply irrelevant. The immediate karma was swift and public, but as the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long, cold shadows across the airport, Chad and Tiffany were beginning to understand that this was just the beginning. The real, life-altering consequences were still to come. The days that followed were a masterclass in social and professional disintegration. For Chad and Tiffany Davenport, the world didn't just stop, it inverted. The very pillars upon which they had built their identities, wealth status and social media validation, crumbled into dust. Back in New York, the fallout at Sterling Thorne Capital was brutal. Robert Harrison used Chad as an example. An all-hands memo was sent out, vaguely referencing an incident of unprofessional conduct that jeopardized client relations and reaffirming the firm's commitment to integrity and respect at all levels. Everyone knew who it was about. Chad wasn't just fired, he was made a pariah. His name became a cautionary tale whispered in the hallways. He tried to find new work, but the world of high finance is a small insular club. The video of him on the plane, now with millions of views, was an impossible stain to remove. Recruiters who had once courted him now left his calls unanswered. LinkedIn connections vanished overnight. He was radioactive. The story of his public firing at the hands of Serafina James had become a legend, a terrifying campfire story for ambitious young associates. He had committed the industry's cardinal sin. He had embarrassed the money. For Tiffany, the karma was more personal and in some ways more cruel. Her influencer career was predicated on an aspirational fantasy, a perfect life of luxury travel designer clothes and effortless glamour. The viral video shattered that illusion with the force of a wrecking ball. The brands that had paid her to promote their products dropped her instantly. A skincare company sent a curt email invoking the morals clause in her contract. A boutique hotel chain, she was a brand ambassador, for scrubbed all mention of her from their social media feeds. Her comment sections, once filled with fawning praise, became a cesspool of mockery and hate. People dug up old posts, recontextualizing them in the light of her exposed personality. A photo of her volunteering at an animal shelter was now captioned by critics with comments like, "Probably complained the shelter dogs weren't a designer breed." Her attempts at an apology video, a tearful scripted performance from their pristine white living room, backfired spectacularly. It was torn apart for its lack of sincerity, with viewers pointing out she was still surrounded by the very luxury goods she used to judge others. She was sorry she got caught, not sorry for what she did. The video became another meme, another source of ridicule. The financial pressure mounted almost immediately. Their opulent lifestyle was financed by Chad's enormous salary, and bonuses supplemented by Tiffany's influencer income. Both were now gone. The lease on their Soho apartment, the payments on their matching Range Rovers, the mountain of credit card debt from their constant shopping, it all became an insurmountable wall of bills. Within 2 months, they were forced to break their lease, paying a hefty penalty, and move out of their apartment. The Range Rovers were repossessed. Tiffany was seen by a former acquaintance, consigning her Gucci and Louis Vuitton bags, the very symbols of her former status, at a high-end resale shop in Midtown, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses and a scarf. Their social circle, a collection of equally status-obsessed couples, abandoned them with ruthless efficiency. Invitations to gallery openings and charity galas stopped arriving. Their calls went to voicemail. They were no longer an asset. They were a liability, a cautionary tale, a social stain to be avoided at all costs. They learned the hard way that their friends were merely transactional relationships based on proximity to wealth and power, both of which they no longer possessed. Meanwhile, Dr. Serafina James's week in Aspen was immensely productive. She met with the new management team of Aura Wing, toured the facilities, and laid out her vision for the airline's future. It was a vision built on a new definition of luxury, one based on efficiency, seamless service, and above all, respect for both customers and employees. She made a point of having lunch with Liam, the flight attendant from Flight 732. She listened to his experiences, his frustrations with the old management, and his ideas for improvement. She was impressed by his composure and his genuine commitment to service. A week later, Liam received a promotion to a lead flight attendant position, along with an invitation to join a new company-wide advisory council on customer experience. His story became an internal legend at Aura Wing, proof that the new owner saw and valued her people. Inspired by the incident, Serafina directed Marcus Thorne to create a new company policy called the Dignity in the Skies Compact. It was a simple, zero-tolerance policy against harassment of any kind, from passenger to crew to passenger or passenger to passenger. It empowered flight crews to deny service and issue lifetime bans to anyone who violated the core principle of mutual respect. It was a simple change, but it sent a powerful message. The culture of Aura Wing was changing from the inside out. The report on Sterling Thorne Capital that Marcus had prepared gave Serafina exactly what she needed. It confirmed that the firm was a key advisor to a massive tech conglomerate in which Nexus Capital held a significant, though silent, stake. She arranged a call with the conglomerate's CEO. She never mentioned Chad Davenport by name. She didn't have to. She simply said, "We're reviewing the performance of all our portfolio assets. We expect our partners, and by extension, their advisors, to operate with the highest levels of integrity and foresight. Firms that exhibit reckless or short-sighted behavior are a risk we are no longer willing to underwrite." The message was received. A month later, the tech conglomerate announced it was moving its business to a rival investment firm. Sterling Thorne Capital lost its biggest client, a blow that sent shock waves through the company and saw its annual profits plummet. Robert Harrison, who had tried to cauterize the wound by firing Chad, ended up suffering a far greater injury himself. The karma had ricocheted upwards, hitting the very culture that produced people like Chad Davenport in the first place. Serafina didn't revel in any of it. To her, it wasn't revenge, it was a market correction. The Davenports and their ilk were a bad investment, and she had simply divested personally and professionally, cleaning up the system in the process. Her actions were as cool and logical as the code she used to write. The outcome was simply the correct, calculated result. Months later, Serafina was in her office, a minimalist space overlooking the city skyline. It was quiet, functional, and devoid of the usual corporate trophies. The only personal item on her large, uncluttered desk was a small framed photo of her grandmother. Beside the desk, resting on a chair, was the olive-green canvas tote bag. It was clean now, the water stain long gone, looking no different than it had before. Flight 732. Her assistant Isabel came in with a tablet. "Dr. James, the Q2 performance reports for Aura Wing are in. They're ahead of all projections." Serafina took the tablet and swiped through the data. Customer satisfaction scores were up 40%. Employee morale, based on internal surveys, was at an all-time high. Bookings had surged not just in first class, but across the entire plane. The story of the Aura Wing owner had ironically become a massive PR victory. People wanted to fly on an airline run by someone who wouldn't tolerate bullies and stood up for her employees. The Dignity in the Skies Compact was being lauded in business journals as a revolutionary step in customer service. The Liam O'Connell initiative is also showing remarkable results, Isabel added, pointing to a section of the report. Liam, the former flight attendant, had proven to be a natural leader. The customer experience council he was on had suggested dozens of small, impactful changes, from better snack options in coach to a more streamlined boarding process that were making a tangible difference. "Excellent," Serafina said, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Give Liam my congratulations, and authorize the budget for the next phase of his council's proposals." She handed the tablet back to Isabel. Her gaze fell on the canvas bag. She thought back to that day on the plane, to the sneers and whispers from the Davenports. In the end, what had they really lost? It wasn't just a job or their social standing. They had lost their illusion. They had built their entire world on a fragile scaffolding of external validation, designer labels, important-sounding job titles, and the approval of other insecure people. When that scaffolding was kicked out from under them, there was nothing left. Serafina's world, by contrast, was built on an internal foundation. It was built on the lessons her grandmother had taught her, symbolized by that simple utilitarian bag. It was a foundation of substance over style of quiet competence, over loud proclamations of character over currency. The bag wasn't a mark of her not being able to afford better. It was a mark of her knowing what truly mattered. It grounded her, reminded her of where she came from and the values that had guided her success. She had heard whispers about the Davenports' fate through the grapevine. They had sold their apartment at a loss and moved to a small suburban town, their flashy life a distant memory. Chad was reportedly working in a low-level sales job for a company that didn't care about his online reputation. Tiffany had deleted all her social media accounts. They had simply vanished. They became a footnote in a story that was for Serafina never really about them. It was about her airline. It was about her employees. It was about building something of lasting value. She picked up the canvas tote, its familiar weight a comfort in her hand. Inside were her notes for the next company she planned to transform, a worn copy of a book on Stoic philosophy, and a small tin of mints her grandmother had always carried. These were her tools. This was her wealth. As she walked out of her office and toward the next meeting, the woman who owned the airline carried no designer handbag. She carried a legacy, and in the quiet, confident rhythm of her stride, there was a lesson for anyone who cared to look closely enough. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. That is the story of how a simple canvas bag became the catalyst for a spectacular karmic reckoning. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't what you wear or what you own. It's the character you carry within you. The Davenports built their world on a foundation of arrogance and brand names, and it crumbled at the first brush with genuine power. Dr. Serafina James built her empire on substance and respect, proving that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. What did you think of the Davenports' ultimate fate? Was their karma deserved, or was it too harsh? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of satisfying justice, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps our channel grow. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder that humility is a superpower. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe and click that notification bell so you never miss another story where pride comes before a spectacular fall. Thanks for listening.